Well, for more, let's cross to our political editor in Canberra, Greg Jennett, who's joined by Liberal Senator Arthur Sinodinos.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, Senator. Let's pick up there on the question of the live sheep trade with the plight of these 10,000 in Pakistan, obviously re-engaging debate or reigniting debate. Labor MPs are calling for a ban on the trade. The Greens are supporting them. Is there ever a point from the coalition's point of view where a moratorium or an outright ban on the live trade would be justified?
Thanks, Greg. Look, I think we have to be very careful about our processes of decision-making in these sorts of cases because they send a signal about how we handle trade policy generally. We can't just be reacting every time we see what can be quite disturbing footage of something happening to our live cattle exports or live sheep exports abroad. We have to make sure that we've put in place a series of measures with all of the relevant countries so that we can guarantee that the animals are looked after properly. Animal welfare is important in its own right. It's also important in terms of promoting the trade in a way that is credible from Australia's point of view. I think we should be focused on that rather than knee-jerk reactions where we talk about potentially banning the trade completely. And in the past, when we've had that knee-jerk reaction, we've stranded plenty of animals and we've also sent businesses potentially to the wall, particularly in Northern Australia. And so we have to handle this stuff sensitively at all levels.
Well, by all accounts, the exporter Wellards and the Australian regulator say that they simply lost control of this shipment at some point after it entered Pakistan. Is that something that Australians just have to accept, that at some point shipments go beyond the control of the Australian system?
Look, we have to examine the circumstances and where we can redress them in a very pragmatic and cost-effective way so that we don't, in inverted commas, lose control. I think that will maximise the prospects for a successful trade. But we need to do that on the basis of information. And it's not enough for the companies and the regulator to say, well, at some stage they lost control. Let's look at the circumstances and see what we can learn from it to improve the way we do the trade.
OK, well, let's move on. The Prime Minister is this morning flying into Melbourne, wrapping up her week-long bid in New York to advance Australia's pitch for the UN Security Council seat. What's your view on the merit of that enterprise?
Look, the Coalition historically has not been against our bids for having a seat on the Security Council. People should understand, though, that in getting a seat, you're only on there for a couple of years and there's limited scope to influence things. It can be a good way to perhaps learn more about the UN system and how to operate within it, but it's not the be-all and end-all of diplomacy, and our concern has been that the way Labor has gone about managing the bid has run the risk of damaging our foreign policy priorities. We've put a fair bit of money into duchessing countries that are not necessarily in our normal sphere of influence. There's been criticism that when Kevin Rudd was Foreign Minister, he didn't spend any time in the Pacific region. Rather, his focus was on the broader world picture. It suited him individually and it also suited this strategy to get the bid. So what we have criticised in many ways is really the conduct of the bid by this government in these circumstances.
Well, indeed, your leader said earlier this week that the time would be better spent by the Prime Minister in Jakarta rather than, to use his words, swanning around in New York. But is it not beyond the wit of a government to do both, to balance regional interests? Indeed, the Prime Minister was at the Pacific Islands Forum for a period of time only last month. Cannot a government walk and chew gum at the same time?
Yes, but this lot have a propensity to trip over themselves while they're looking for their gum. And our concern has been that the boat people issue has been a very important policy priority that we think Labor has been dragged kicking and screaming to do something about. They've had a lot more enthusiasm for these sorts of foreign policy ventures than they have for the nuts and bolts of fixing up issues like boat people. And when she was in New York, I think the Prime Minister could have had more than a short meeting with Sinodinos to talk about the parameters of further measures around stopping the people smuggling trade. It was a good opportunity to do that because Sinodinos did turn up in New York, and the follow-up should be further discussions in Jakarta or elsewhere to advance our interests on this very important issue.
So how does the coalition play this when the result comes down on the 18th of October? If Australia loses, it's a waste of money and misjudged effort, and if it wins, you welcome it?
Look, if we win, we will welcome it. Of course we will welcome it. But that does not detract from the criticism we've made around the way the bid has been conducted and the potential impact on our foreign policy priorities. And what we will be doing is, if and when, if we win the bid, is making sure, if we are in government, that we conduct ourselves in a way which maximises the prospect of Australia having real influence in that particular forum.
Well, indeed, if you do form government, you'd be the beneficiaries of this effort.
Well, we would have to conduct ourselves appropriately in that forum if we were in government, but we would do it in a context where we had balanced foreign policy priorities, including the focus on our own region and important regional issues like people smuggling.
Now, flowing on from foreign policy, we did get some broad parameters around the coalition's defence priorities earlier this week when Tony Abbott gave a speech to the RSL National Congress. Now, critically, on the question of funding, there were few new promises there, only an aspiration to grow the defence pie over time when it's affordable. Is that good enough? Many in the defence community said aspirations don't work, show us the money.
Well, Greg, Tony Abbott did also announce a commitment to appropriate indexation of military pensions. That was a pretty solid commitment that follows up things he said before on that subject. On the issue of defence spending, because at the moment it seems to be about, I think, the same proportion of GDP as we had in 1938, our fear is that we're cutting too deeply into the front line and compromising the effectiveness and capacity of our frontline forces. And so our concern is that over time we should be moving towards a higher proportion of GDP being spent on defence. The reason that Tony describes it as an aspiration is for two reasons. First of all, we have to have regard to the overall budgetary situation that we potentially inherit if we win government. And also there would have to be, I think, a recalibration of the white paper that Labor is talking about bringing out next year, because, to be honest, I think any government, any new government, needs to cast a fresh eye over our defence priorities, and we should not make the mistake of 2009 where the former government, or this government, produced a white paper which specifically targeted a country in the region as being the country we were preparing against.
But given the knowledge you have of the budgetary situation, can you outline any point at which you think the 3% growth could actually kick in?
I think that would have to be subject to looking at it in the context of the budgetary situation. And you raise an important point. At the moment, the budgetary situation is deteriorating. We're increasing our longer-term obligations. Some independent economists say we could be adding as much as $20 billion a year to the budget bottom line by 2020. So you are right to say that it is a big challenge ahead, and that's why it's right for Tony Abbott not to just say, well, we'll do 3% of GDP no matter what the budgetary outlook.
All right, Senator, now we couldn't let you go on this football weekend without getting your tips for today's and tomorrow's grand finals. You are, as many people would be aware, quite the rugby league fan, so entirely legitimate to ask you. And
look, I reckon it's the Swans today and it's Melbourne tomorrow. I think Melbourne have been consistent over a very long period of time. Consistency is very important in footy as it is in politics, Greg.
Well, may all your tips come true, Senator, and thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, mate. Bye.